Good evening, everyone. We're so pleased to have you join us this evening as we have another of our monthly Finding the Balance during COVID-19. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. My name is Marva Wisdom, and I am pleased to be your moderator this evening. And after the land acknowledgement, I'll do some housekeeping rules and move from housekeeping. I won't say it's a rule, there are guides for you for tonight. And then I will move to the introduction of our panelists. And after that, we will start taking your questions and we'll get through as many of them as we possibly can. And then we'll have some closing remarks and that will take us right to 8:15 or so. And so, recognizing the continued and ongoing effects of colonialism in this area, Ontario and Canada, and as people living and working in Waterloo, Wellington, we would like to acknowledge and honor that Guelph is situated on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe peoples, specifically the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also acknowledge and honor that our offices in Kitchener, CMHA offices in Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, and Fergus are situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised by the Government of Canada to Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. This is the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, which include the Seneca, Cayuga, Tuscarora, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk First Nations. Today, these gathering places are home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and with gratitude, we acknowledge that the settler population has been able to benefit from this beautiful land. As citizens, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of this land. Acknowledging the land and the people whose land we are on is only a small part of the process of decolonization and certainly of reconciliation. And so each month, Anne-Marie and Helen will be the two panelists answering our questions, and they will be answering questions about mental health as well as physical implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. And tonight, they are joined by Dr. Matthew Tenenbaum, the Associated Medical Officer of Health of the Guelph Wellington Dufferin Public Health Unit. We welcome Matthew and we thank him for being here. Today is Bell Let's Talk Day. This year's Bell Let's Talk Day campaign highlights the ways that we can support ourselves and those we care about through actions like listening, being there, and talking. Every Canadian can play a part in their communities, in their workplaces, in their schools, and at home. COVID-19 has affected every aspect of our lives, including our mental health. However, tools are available to support ourselves and each other. We will talk about these tools this evening. Dr. Anne-Marie Zadlik is a primary care physician in Guelph, providing comfort and guidance to thousands during the pandemic. And Anne-Marie's become a Facebook sensation, as we like to say, with her daily posts of encouragement and sound scientific knowledge about COVID-19 and other health issues. And Helen Fishburne is the CEO of the Canadian Mental Health Association of Waterloo, Wellington. And of course, CMHA Waterloo Wellington is a co-sponsor of this Finding the Balance of this webinar, along with Bracelet of Hope. And Helen is a lifelong advocate for increased awareness of mental health issues. And she has dedicated her career to advancing the design of an improved mental health care system. And Dr. Matthew Tenenbaum, the Associate Medical Officer of Health of the Guelph Wellington Dufferin Public Health Unit. Prior to joining public health, Dr. Tenenbaum worked for several years as a family physician in Hamilton. He completed his residency in public health and preventative medicine at McMaster University, during which he spent time at several health units in Southern Ontario, including, of course, our own public health. We're so happy to have him, and we're so glad that he is joining Emery and Helen and here to listen to you tonight. And you can imagine for our physicians and for our mental health expert, how very busy this time is. But all of them recognize tonight that this conversation is important, hearing from you is important, and sharing information with you is important. And we also have in the background, Megan, and Megan is helping us out tonight, has set us all up to make sure things are running smoothly. We appreciate that with the work she's doing and the rest of the CMHA Waterloo Wellington team. So before we get started, I just want to share a few housekeeping rules with you. Whether you're joining us tonight on Zoom for this webinar via Facebook link, live broadcast, we are certainly ready to answer the questions. Either platform is fine. We would love for you to type your questions into the Q&A. And what we will do will be looking at the information there, and we will go through the questions and we'll get through as many as possible. But know that if it's a duplicated question, we likely will not answer both in the interest of time. We are recording this just to let you know, and we're recording the webinar because we want to make sure we're posting it on CMHA for those who want to go back and take a look on that webpage. So CMHA Waterloo Wellington, and the information is provided for you in the promotion so that you can have that. As well, it's going to be posted on Emery's Facebook pages. And this happens sometime after the webinar is over. Give us a little bit of time. We're really busy, so don't just jump on right after this is done. It might be about 48 hours or so. So what I'd love to do now is get started with a discussion with a few opening remarks and reflections from Helen, Emery, and Matthew. And I'll ask Helen if she could start, followed by Emery, and then Matthew. Thank you again for joining us. Again, we'll get to as many of your questions as possible. We really appreciate you being here. And we are here to be a support system for our entire community. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marva. Great introduction, and it's awesome to be here, especially on Bell Let's Talk Day. It has been a tough go, though. There's a definite cumulative impact of this last 2 years of the pandemic on all of us, and particularly this last wave with Omicron, as we didn't expect to be here, and we were not mentally prepared to go back to the restrictions, which are really tough on our mental health, even though we understand why we need them. So while some of us will contract Omicron, every single one of us will feel the mental health impact of it. But we are getting through this together. There is no vaccine for the mental health impact of the pandemic, so we need to boost our coping. And today, especially on Bell Let's Talk Day, it's an invitation to do just that. It's our moment to reflect, to be vulnerable, to support, and to come together as people. So exactly what we need at this point of the pandemic and in a long and tough month. So we're really glad you're here so we can keep talking, keep listening, and keep caring for each other.
Thank you, Helen. Emery?
So I'm just going to start with the good news because it's hard to find. I've noticed in the last little while there's just a continued explosion of negative news and misinformation. I was actually sitting with a patient today who has had a first dose but not a second, and he's really hesitating to get the second. He showed me a video on his cell phone, and it looked so real. And the video was between a police officer and a journalist who were talking about all of the many thousands and thousands of people who died from vaccination. Not all. The messenger vaccines have not caused any deaths, but I think we're at risk for misinformation now more than ever, and that's because the pandemic is dragging on. But there is good news. Third doses, there's 6 million people in the province that have had a third dose, and As of last week, there was no one in the hospital or the ICU that had 3 doses. I took last week off from reviewing the news, so I'm not sure what the numbers are now, but that was at the point when there were 5 million people vaccinated. So 3rd doses are the key for all of us to not only not get sick, but to get us out of this wave. You're so protected with 3 doses. 2 doses in kids, there's a question in the chat already about that. Very protective against serious illness. And when we know that kids are already at very low risk of serious illness, the vaccines protect them even more. So it's my opinion that there may be booster shots for kids under 18, but at present, the 2 doses are very protective in a group that is not at high risk. Partial opening on Monday. I'm really looking forward to this. I think we're ready for it. I think we need to open restaurants and gyms. People are really suffering as a result of not having the community that's found in restaurants, bars, and gyms. And so many people have suffered with respect to their businesses as a result of going into yet another shutdown or closure. So I'm going for lunch, but I'm going someplace lunch. And then kids under 5, just to let you know, the FDA is about to approve an under 5 vaccine, and Canada usually follows suit shortly thereafter. So good news out there.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Thanks. Thanks, Marva, Helen, Anne-Marie, and thank you for being on the call tonight. I just want to acknowledge, starting off this conversation, how difficult the past month has been, built on the past couple of years we've all been through together. As I think Helen mentioned earlier, this is not where we had hoped to be at this point in the pandemic 2 years in. Last fall, when we were dealing with Delta, things seemed like maybe they were on a much better path. We had vaccines in so many arms with 2 doses, and things generally seemed like they were looking more optimistic. And of course, things have been really challenging. We had a real curveball hitting our community and our world with the Omicron variant. And that has, of course, thrown many people for a loop and really put some new challenges in front of us, both in terms of the impact of the virus itself, as well as all the measures that have come alongside that. I do want to acknowledge, though, that within our community, while we have been hit with this curveball, what I've been seeing in public health is people really meeting those challenging circumstances and finding ways within their own lives to develop control over these circumstances that are difficult to be in control over. And I think that it really does come down to thinking about what each one of us can do in these really challenging circumstances to best protect ourselves, protect those around us who we care for, and to best protect our overall well-being in this difficult time. For us, we are still talking about the same basic things that people have been adhering to. Things like, of course, the importance of staying home if you're not feeling well, the importance of wearing a good, well-fitting mask whenever you're out and about in a public space, the importance of still doing that physical distancing and hand washing and all of those other measures. Those are things that we can do that are very much within our control, that reduce our risk and allow us to do our part as a community to help all of us get through this together. And of course, with vaccines, we are now at a place where we're offering 3rd doses. We're making them broadly available to every adult. And we are really encouraging everyone to get a 1st, 2nd, or 3rd dose, whatever you're eligible for. Every dose counts. Every dose adds to your protection. And it is still the most important thing that all of us can do to take control of our lives in this really challenging circumstance and to do our part to help get our community out of where we are right now. I know things feel very bleak. It's been a very tough winter so far, but I do want to say that I do think we are going to get through this soon. We're going to be heading to a better place in the coming weeks. I think that we are all taking the pieces of our own actions into our hands that we need to be taking, and that is helping us get to that better place down the road. We are beginning to see those lights in the end of the tunnel, and I think that as dark and as dreary as things seem now, in a few weeks from now, things will seem better, and we'll be entering a spring ahead that I think will be a much more optimistic for our community. So thank you for everything you're doing, and hopefully we can answer some of your questions here this evening.
Thank you, Matthew. And before we get started into the questions, when we started this a year and a half ago now, Emery and Helen. We often would put up a poll just to check in with you, and we haven't done that for a while. So we thought we'd put up a poll this time and ask you on the line some questions. How are you doing? 1, are you struggling? 2, not so sure how you're doing. Are you feeling okay? And are you just all good? You're doing great, so fantastically well that you can help everybody else that needs support. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to do the poll, and maybe we'll go to the question number 1, and then we'll check in with the results of the poll, unless it comes up really quickly. Thank you, Megan, for putting that up. And you'll cue me when that's ready. Now, earlier on, I know that Helen said something that I thought was really great. She said that the way that she gives the Bell Let's Talk Day and the launch has given her a big hug. And it feels like a hug in times like this. Haven't asked Matthew yet. Matthew's walking into this. And then, so I asked Anne-Marie, where does she get her hug? And Helen, maybe you can talk about that hug. And Anne-Marie, how you get your big hug. And I'll ask Matthew as well, because we all have to practice self-care first, right? One of the parts that we go through, if you think about the airline, you know, put the mask, the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put it on your child. So I just wondered, as we wait for the poll results, if Helen can talk about the hug that she gets from Bell Let's Talk and why.
Yeah, it's just an awesome day because it just celebrates our vulnerability. You know, we fight through the silence and the stigma, and we celebrate who we are as our real selves, our true selves. If you read any social media platforms, and there's lots of days that you want to stay away from social media platforms, but today is not one of those days. There are so many amazing stories of people sharing their courageous journeys and healing and hope, and so much support and love for each other. So that's why it feels like a hug today, Marva.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. That's great. I'm going to read the poll and then go to Anne-Marie and go to Matthew and then Anne-Marie as you're on the screen. So we have 23% of our folks that responded say that they're struggling, and 27% say, meh, I'm struggling. I'm in between struggling and okay. And then 39% people say they're actually okay. And the folks that are all good is 10%. So we're hoping tonight that maybe some of this might be helpful, and we'll do a poll at the end to say how you're feeling now. We'll throw this back up as questions. So having seen what everyone is going through right now, Anne-Marie, how do you get your hug?
Earlier that I didn't say this part. I'm a little bit crazy because my favorite months of the year are January and August. January, because we're having a real January this year. It's the sparkly snow. It's magical. It's clear blue skies, and it's freezing cold, and I can ski as much as I can find time for. So that's my big hug. I got to ski on the weekend, cross country, not downhill.
Matthew, thanks, Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Marva. So my big hug is actually a literal big hug, although in some ways it's a little hug. For me, I have a 9-month-old at home, and ending my day, whenever my day ends and I can leave the office, the hug I get from her is what gets me through that day and what helps me get through to the next day. So I think, you know, all of us have people in our lives that bring us joy, things in our lives that bring us joy. It's really important to keep those things in mind, even on those most difficult days, because they're what helps us know what we're looking forward to and help us get through to when things are going to be better.
I love it. My 3-year-old granddaughter, Cassia, is my hug.
Awesome.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to jump to the first question. The first question is from Judy that says, if you've had COVID, do you need the booster shot and why? Don't you develop a natural immunity? If you do recommend getting the booster, how long should you wait after recovering from COVID to get it? So I'm going to throw this out to maybe Matthew can start off with that.
Sure. Thanks, Marvin. That's a great question. It's a question we get a lot. And I'll take that as 2 pieces. First off, if you had the infection, should you get a booster shot? And secondly, how long should you wait if you get the shot? The first thing I'll say is that if you had COVID-19, there is probably some immune response that you're going to get from having had that infection. Your body's going to expose to the virus, it's learned what the virus looks like, and it's going to have some memory of that encounter. But when it comes to the infection and the immune response you get to it, it's going to vary from person to person. Everyone's reaction is going to be a little bit different. Some people have really mild infections, other people have more severe infections. And it seems like the strength of someone's reaction in their immune system, it differs from person to person and from infection to infection. And so we are still saying that it is important to get whatever vaccine doses you're eligible for, even if you have been vaccinated, whether that's getting a first, second, or third dose. We know that even if you get some protection from the infection, adding vaccines only adds more protection. And it helps you be even better off in terms of any severe outcomes down the road or any chance of reinfection down the road, which unfortunately, while uncommon, can happen. When it comes to the timing of when you should get a next vaccine shot after having been infected, I know there's been a lot of talk about this in the media, different experts weighing in about what interval or what waiting period they think makes the most sense. We in public health are actually looking to our expert groups, for example, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, NACI. I understand they're actually looking at this question right now and working on some recommendations for us about what they think makes the most sense based upon the evidence. We don't have that yet, so we don't have any formal recommendations about a waiting period right now, but that may come in the future. Right now, we're saying if you had the infection and you're feeling well and you're resolved and you're out of isolation and you're due for a vaccine, please do go out and get that vaccine when you can.
Thanks, Matthew. Can you say what the acronym NACI is for those who might be wondering?
Sure. NACI is a National Advisory Committee on Immunization, and it's a group of experts from across Canada and different disciplines that all focus on immunization, and they make recommendations that inform all of our work.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew. That was really thorough and might cover some of what's in the second question, but I'm afraid I might miss something if I don't go to the second question. So bear with me while I read it very quickly. It's long. Sue says, unfortunately, I contacted COVID at a wedding. Henry, get ready to answer. December 18th, 5 days post my booster shot. Fortunately, my symptoms were mild. My question is, what is my immunity now? And then she continues to say, of course, I will continue to follow public health guidelines, but wondering about visiting and having dinner together with my mom, who is also triple vaccinated. Is this safe? And she says, my daughter had the booster shot and developed symptoms the next day. She recovered well, having only mild symptoms. Did that booster shot have any opportunity to work to protect her now? Or did she develop immunity from the illness itself? So 3 questions in there, Henry. I hope you could follow.
I'll try. So the last question about her daughter, the third booster dose did not have time to take effect if she developed COVID symptoms the next day. So she had to have been exposed to COVID before that third dose was given. It means that 2 doses were protective for her in terms of preventing her from having serious illness. I think the other question was based on how much immunity a person gets with 2 vaccines or 3 vaccines, and then you add a case of Omicron on top of that. So there's some research that shows you do get more immunity from actually having the Omicron variant or having COVID-19. But I think the jury's out in terms of how much you actually get. So we can't rely on it to be more protective than getting 3 boosters if you're eligible. I missed, there's one more question that I need you to remind me of, Marva. Are you still there?
She's talking about her mom. Yes, I'm here. I'm just off camera just for a moment, as sometimes you get a little glitchy in there. Just want to help with the bandwidth.
Good.
Maybe
Good.
lots of kids doing homework.
Yes.
And the other question was, she was going to follow public health guidelines, but wondering about visiting and having dinner with her mom, who's triple vaccinated, whether it's safe.
So if I was going to visit with my mom, who was triple vaccinated, and I had been triple vaccinated, I would still be concerned depending on the age of my mother. So if my mother was older, let's say over the age of 60 and frail, I would still want to put a mask on and keep my distance, because people with 3 doses, younger people in particular, can have asymptomatic infection. 19 when you had 3 doses, but you don't know you had, and you can still spread it to other folks.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much. I'm going to move to the next question. This is for Helen. It's Bell Let's Talk Day, and we know the Omicron variant. This is from Chris, and recent lockdowns have really impacted many people's mental health. How can we deal with the challenges we are facing right now and support others as well? And before Helen answers, I'm going to suggest when Anne-Marie's answering, maybe we can all just go off camera just for a moment. I think it will be better. We only lost a little bit of what you said, but depending on where it is. So over to you, Helen.
Great, thanks, Marva. Yeah, this is a really important question, because right now we really need to look at how we are coping with our stress and worry differently. What we were doing at the beginning of the pandemic 2 years ago, and our personal resilience that we had, it's long gone. It's been a long 2 years. This particular wave has been really bruising for all of us. But again, because we didn't expect it, we weren't mentally prepared for it. So if you use the analogy of the marathon runner, prior to Omicron, we could literally see the finish race, the finish line. We could almost touch it. And then Omicron hit us, and it feels like we've had to go back to the beginning of the start. And it's really hard on people who are physically and mentally exhausted to go back to the start of the race. So using that analogy, the shoes that we've had to run that race are worn out. We don't have any support left. We don't have anything left in our shoes. We need new shoes. So if we translate that into mental health context, we have to find new ways of coping. Kale and smoothies and candles are awesome, but their value has run out. We need new tools in our toolbox. We need some time potentially with a therapist. We need to check in with our family doctor if we're not sleeping well. We need to join webinars like this, where we're opening the conversation, rethinking about things differently, having new connections, new ways of managing our stress and anxiety. I think it's also honest, we have to be honest with ourselves about what are the ways that we're coping that are harmful versus helpful. And there are lots of things that we're doing that are helpful, but we really need to try and reduce the harmful things, because those actually can create more problems for us. I'll just give you 2 examples. Pizza and chocolate are great short-term. They aren't, long-term coping strategies. Same with wine. A little bit of wine is awesome and it helps you relax. A lot of wine, long-term, not a good solution, right? So we have to really be honest with ourselves about the ways that we're coping. And again, really challenge us, each one of us. What is that new pair of shoes that you can try on to increase your coping, to boost that coping that we had talked about, so that you are managing this different, because this is a really long race and we need to find new ways of coping. So challenge yourself to find new ways, reach out, try something different. And I think you'll be really pleased at the results. It's really going to provide some support and comfort for you. You're on mute there, Marva.
I am on mute. It's really quite interesting. There have been so many recent research that have come out around the mental health component of this, which seem to be our mental health is worse than it was last year. To the opening point of you and of Matthew and of all of us, the recognition that it's going on so long. So compounding the fear is also the length of time. And I'm hoping that people are thinking about how they give themselves a hug. Feel free to drop it in the chat or elsewhere. We'd love to know. It's some strategies that we can share with others. What helps you get through your day? The next question, I'll jump to Matthew. I am double vaccinated and boosted, says Michelle. What can be said about the cases where people claim it was the vaccine? How to handle that when people share that information or mention it? And an example is a 17-year-old girl from out east who is now in a wheelchair and claims that it was the Pfizer vaccine. How do we debunk those stories? And I know that, Anne-Marie, you were talking about some of the things that you were reading and going off social media for a while. So maybe after Matthew, if you wanted to add some things to that, that would be awesome.
Thanks, Marva. So when it comes to the vaccine, we understand there's a lot of information out there and still a lot of concern in some quarters about the vaccine and the fact that it's a new vaccine and People have questions about what that means and how safe it is. And we've talked a lot in public health about why we are confident in these vaccines. If you think about it, even though this vaccine has only been around for, since late 2020, it has been one of the most intensely studied vaccines in all of human history. And we have seen this vaccine roll out around the world, millions and millions and millions of doses that have been given. And so because of all that study, the number of doses that have been given, and the really strong systems we have for following up on any safety concerns, we actually have some really rich data that gives us further confidence in the fact that these vaccines are effective and are safe. Initially, someone could reasonably ask, if there were rare side effects, how would you know? But we're now at a place where, having had millions and millions of doses being given around the world, we have a much bigger data set that actually helps us look for things that could be really, really rare and give us confidence that they're going to be there or not. We have seen time and time again, these are very, very safe vaccines. Even things that we typically worry about with vaccines like severe allergic reactions happen very, very rarely and typically are not happening in the way that some people worried they were going to happen. So we are seeing that these vaccines work, and it is as important as ever to get the vaccine. It's not something that's, this message isn't going to convince everyone. We know some people are still really hesitant, and we're still trying public health to make sure that we are changing hearts and minds where we can. But certainly the data tells us these vaccines are safe. And with every passing day and every study that I see published, we have more and more reason to believe in these vaccines.
You're on mute, Marva.
Children, I did that twice. This is not good. Parents of children under 5 continues to face challenges, Helen, during the time with their children not being eligible for vaccination. Should parents feel comfortable having their children in daycare or school right now? And how can parents tackle the mental fatigue that they have been facing for almost 2 years, trying to protect their young children?
Excellent question, and so timely, right? Given that schools are back. So first thing, just to be very clear about, our kids' mental health is best supported when they're at schools. The structure, the routine, the support, time with their peers, all of that, research has shown over and over again that we need our kids to be in school. So that's the first thing. And we really, really do support them being in schools. It is really tough on parents to trust. I'm a parent as well. And when your kids leave the nest and they're out of your reach, you worry. And it doesn't matter how old your kids are, you will always worry. There's a lot of trust building that you have to do. There's a lot of letting go. And, I think Matthew spoke to it earlier as well. Like, what can you control? What can't you control? We know we work really closely with the school boards. They are doing absolutely everything they can to keep our kids safe, to put new measures in place, masking, HEPA filters, distancing, all of those things. They are working really hard. It's not perfect. We know it's not perfect, but they are working hard, and we have to work with our schools and our teachers and our kids to continue to build that trust and continue to keep that communication open. It is really tough, but we know it is best for kids. In terms of parents and exhaustion, self-key is absolutely key here for parents. Although parents usually don't get much time to themselves, it's really important that they take some breaks, schedule some time for them, for parents to do things that they find enjoyable, talking to other parents, seeing how they're managing, create a little support system. And of course, there's always formal supports you can access, like a therapist, your family doctor, counseling centers, and of course, here 24/7. But I think, Marva, what's really important here is just setting that expectation as a family that everyone is managing the best they can. Families are a little bit like an Instant Pot. If you have an Instant Pot, right? It's an intense pressure cooker, and there's a pressure valve, right? You have to let that relief valve go, take some of that pressure off, adjust those expectations at home, know that you're all doing the best, maybe have pancakes for dinner instead of a roast beef dinner. Like, just do everything you can to care for each other, to be reasonable, be supportive, and know that this is a really great opportunity for all of us to spend quality time with our kids as well. So I hope that's helpful, but really that mindset
Mhm.
and that letting go and really keeping those conversations alive are really important with your family.
Thank you, Helen. That's great. Before I go to Henry for the next question, Kevin Pollock sent in, my hug is all my groups each day and my workers and doctors. A good video is a help also. And Ina Bentley writes, my hugs are free virtual travel tours around the world. That's wonderful. That's one of the advantages of this COVID-19, that we get a chance to visit across the world with different people that we wouldn't normally necessarily see or interact with. Thank you, Ina and Kevin. I was just typing in the chat the hugs from the panelists so that folks can remember what everyone has said and sort of jump on it before we end tonight. So for you, Henry, when can we expect to be facing more of a normal existence? Will we see a time when COVID won't impact our lives on a daily basis? Adam is asking that question. And I'm going to go off camera to help your bandwidth. And
Okay.
if Matthew and Helen could do the same, that would be awesome.
Okay, so that's a very tough question. But I think as we get closer to the summer, spring and summer, if more people have 3 doses of vaccine, we're going to get much a normal life than we have now. I think we will be living with COVID for a very long time, likely years, but it is possible with 3 doses of vaccine, if you qualify, to get the Omicron variant under control to the point where little fires might be lit up here and there, but they're extinguished quickly by contact tracing, vaccination, and supporting those who are infected.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. That's great. Thank you. Dave asks, how can we combat PPE fatigue and the feeling that what we are doing isn't working as more people are getting the Omicron variant? Matthew?
So I think this, this idea of fatigue of the pandemic, something we've been hearing a lot about, whether it's PPE fatigue, vaccine fatigue, mask fatigue, the fatigue with all the measures that we've been recommending, where it seems like after 2 years of doing them, we should be further ahead than we are. And I think that's a really understandable reaction, given that none of us thought at the outset we would still be doing this, still be in this position 2 years into the pandemic. In my head, when I think about this, I think about it a bit of a different way. I think about it in terms of, if we weren't doing those things, if we didn't have effective vaccines that were available, if we didn't have masks that we knew worked, if we didn't do physical distancing, if we didn't stay home when we were sick, what would that universe look like? How much worse would things be than what they are right now? And I do really strongly believe that even as difficult as things are right now, if we weren't doing those things, things would be immeasurably worse. You would have more illness, more hospitalizations, more death, because we know those measures work. And even though it's a lot to ask of people to keep practicing them for 2 years, I still think they are making a difference. And I think that if we stopped doing those things, we would lose that layer of protection that we need to rely on right now, given where we are. So it's not the best message to say this, but I will say that we should keep doing those things, even if it's difficult, because they still do work and we have confidence in that fact. Marva, you're on mute again.
I told myself that before anybody else did. I beat you, Matthew. I beat you to it. It's really quite interesting. The continuous message that we're hearing and we continue to hear are the various ways that we need to keep doing what we're doing, and that it is working, not as quickly as we've hoped. And there are a few things that are sort of out of our control. Another variant coming along is out of our control, but the stuff that is within our control is making a huge difference, and that we need to keep doing that. Karen writes in the chat, we have heard that there's another variant. Speaking of things out of our control, Omicron B strain being seen prominently in Europe, and that it was expected to make its way here. Do you know anything about this variant? And the person says, ugh.
I'm happy to take that one, Marva, because that is something we've been looking a lot at recently as we've heard these reports coming out of Europe. Essentially, we've been dealing with the Omicron variant since December. And it's not really just one virus, but if you think about Omicron, it's a family of viruses, and they're all closely related. And one part of the family is what we call BA1, it's the Omicron we've been dealing with through December into January. And there's this other branch off the family tree, not too far off, but on the family tree, that is called BA2. It's still Omicron, but it's a slightly different flavor of Omicron. And we are actually doing a lot right now to learn more about that. We don't have a ton of data on it yet because it has not been as common, but we are learning more about it because we're seeing, for example, in parts of Europe, that it is becoming more common. It seems to be overtaking the other Omicron that we've been dealing with more familiarly in places like Denmark and now the UK. So we are going to have more information as you learn more about this and how it may be different and what that means for our community. But right now it's still very early. And I want to tell people that this is still part of the Omicron family, and it's just something we're going to have to get more data on to better understand whether it means anything significant for our current community context.
So just stay tuned. More information
Exactly.
will come, just waiting. Great, thank
Matthew,
you.
can I just add a comment? And it's a question to you, Matthew. I think it's true that if the new variant is just a short branch off the family tree of Omicron, that most likely vaccines will be effective against it. We can't say that for sure, but the fact that it's so closely related, there's a good chance that the vaccines will work. Is that true?
So I think there's still a lot we don't know. We need more data, but I think that this virus will probably behave in terms of how vaccines work against it, similar to how the vaccines work against our current Omicron variant. And we've seen time and time again, whether it's the UK variant Alpha, whether it was Delta, or whether it's now Omicron, the vaccines are still incredibly effective when it comes to preventing hospitalizations, severe illness, and death. It's incredible that these vaccines, which were designed against the original COVID-19 virus, they still provide protection against those most severe outcomes, even with all these variants coming our way since then.
Thank you, Matthew. Is that okay, Anne Marie?
Yes, can I just
follow up?
Can I make a counter comment? We're going to just kind of like inspire people here,
Yes.
because the technology that created these vaccines is pretty remarkable. That's the intellectual property of the world. And if you could ever be ready for COVID-19, we were certainly ready with these technologies. So the fact that these vaccines continue to keep people out of hospital, as a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, when there were 5 million people that had a third dose, there were no cases of serious hospitalizations or death in people who had 3 vaccines. So the fact that these vaccines continue to work and keep us out of hospital, keep us from getting sick, is pretty miraculous and pretty amazing. So that really inspires hope for me. Anyway, that's my big hug for today, is understanding what Matthew just said.
That's awesome. Thanks, Anne Marie. And while you're talking, this next one is for you then. Science is saying that 2 doses plus booster is really what's needed to be protected against Omicron. Kids 5 to 11 only have 1 or 2 doses. How protected are they against Omicron? For Anne Marie.
Do you have an answer to that?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that one if you like, Anne Marie. So, when it comes to the rollout of the vaccines in 5 to 11-year-olds, we're of course still gathering data to understand how the number pans out when it comes to protection against Omicron. We have data coming out right now in huge quantities about Omicron and adults who've gotten the vaccine, and we're seeing that for adults, that 3rd dose does make a difference. But I want to mention that with adults, the context is also different. If you think about it, we've been rolling out vaccines to adults for about a year now. It's been a little over a year since we had our first doses administered in our community. And most people got their 2nd dose sometime last summer or fall. And so these people who got 2nd doses back then, they're now months and months and months out from that point in time. And unfortunately, there has been some waning of the protection, we think. And that is why the 3rd dose has such an impact. The 3rd dose raises up your body's immune memory of the virus, helps get those antibodies pumping out again. And that's one of the reasons that we think the effectiveness of 3 doses is more significant than the effectiveness of 2 doses. Part of it is the fact that it's a 3rd dose, but part of it is also that it's a recent dose. And relying on a second dose you got yesterday versus a second dose you got 6 months ago, those are very different contexts. So while we are still going to see how it looks when we get data for kids in the vaccines, and I know that our expert advisory groups like NACI are going to be looking at that data to make recommendations. Right now, the adults data tells us they need to get a third dose because they got a second dose months and months and months ago.
Thank you. Anything to add? And following up with that in that age category, as there's no longer any reporting of COVID cases in schools, what advice do you have for parents who feel anything but empowered? And this parent said there's the 30% absenteeism reports are clearly no value, as the absenteeism include all reasons, and they're feeling a little bit helpless. So I think it's a little bit of the mental health component, Helen, as well as children in school, and how do we help parents to feel relatively more comfortable with COVID cases in schools. Emery, do you want to take a stab at that? Or does Matthew want to take a stab at that?
Matthew and I can probably both stab at it. I think that it is important for parents to know, and this is on the heels of what Matthew just talked about, that if your kids are vaccinated, your school age kids have had 2 doses of vaccine, they are protected from serious illness. And that so in kids is still extremely rare. Serious illness, hospitalization, extremely rare. So as a parent, I would be very concerned as well. Can't give you 100% reassurance, but there's only a 50% or so vaccination rate across the province for school age kids. And the best way to feel more comfortable, more reassured, is to get your child both doses of vaccine.
Great. Matthew and then Helen.
Thanks. I think just building off of what Anne-Marie just said, I think my first remark is that when it comes to, having your child in school right now in our current context, there is no right way or wrong way to feel. I think almost everyone has some degree of mixed feeling about that. It is a really challenging time for our community, but we also know that having kids in school is really, really important for their learning, for their social and emotional development, and for their ability to function and be children at this point in their lives. What I can say is that we in public health have been working for those 2 years of the pandemic really closely with our school boards to talk about all the recommended measures that we want them to take to make sure that we are using every option to stop transmission where we can. We always think of stopping COVID transmission as almost like a Swiss cheese stack. You have one layer of masks, another layer of distancing, another layer of cohorting. Vaccines are a layer. And you really want to optimize all of those pieces as best we can in accordance with the evidence we have about how COVID spreads. What we've seen, fortunately, is that COVID-19 in schools has not been a big driver of community transmission. We have seen COVID-19 in schools, but it has not been pushing our numbers up as a community. It hasn't been, a breeding ground for amplification of the virus. But we do know COVID cases can come into schools because, of course, COVID exists in the community. And our focus really has been on making sure that we have all the measures maximized and optimized to really try and stop COVID from spreading through every chance we get. Additionally, given that we don't have the numbers, we don't have the testing happening and available to children, we're not going to find every single case. We really are asking everyone to, in some ways, go back to basics and really think about the importance of that daily screening tool, and really, really, really emphasizing staying home. If your child has any of the symptoms that are on that screening tool, making sure that they are only coming back when they're feeling well, making sure that if they have symptoms, they're using their rapid tests to make sure they have an answer to the question about whether it's COVID or not. It is in some ways managing this in a back to basics way, and we're doing everything we can to keep COVID out of our schools as much as possible.
Helen, excuse me, as parents continue.
Yeah, I would just say it's really important at this part to separate fact from fears, right? Anne-Marie and Matthew have laid out the facts really well. And again, there's so many important tools in place to keep our kids safe. It's not perfect. but we know that so many safeguards are there. So we have to find a way to channel our fears, our worry, the anxiety, which of course as parents, we all carry for our kids. So connect with other parents, talk to your principal, talk to your teachers, get the facts, and then try to manage those fears and those worries in ways that are productive. And there are many ways that parents can do that. Lots of opportunities for, connect with a therapist, connect with the counseling center, connect with the social worker at school, connect with other parents virtually. There's all kinds of things that you can do. Just find a way to manage that anxiety. And then that helps separate the fact and the fears.
Ellen, is the Grove up and running now for young people who are needing some support beyond counseling, just to find time? Maybe it's virtual, of course. Can you comment on the Grove?
Grove is our youth wellness hubs, which are just an awesome addition to our system for kids. We have 3 sites open in rural Wellington, so in Erin, Palmerston, and Fergus. We are just working on opening 2 of our sites in Guelph, one at the U of G and one at the YMCA. They'll be open soon. And then of course, we're opening a 3rd site in Guelph at our new Children's Mental Health building, which will be open later this year, a brand new building on Woolwich Street. So those are amazing opportunities for youth to drop in, get some support. We have youth ambassadors, we have youth clinicians, we have, they help make the connections as well to our formal support system, both at CMHA and at the school boards. So they're just amazing resources, and we're so pleased and happy to have the Grove as part of our system.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks for sharing that. I have a big mask question. It's a long one. So get ready, Matthew and Emery especially, to answer this one. I am just at a loss of what my kids should be wearing at school. I bought N95s, but my little guy isn't comfortable. My preteen is good with them and is wearing them, but disposing of them every day, so much waste. Can he wear 2 days in a row? That's N95. That's question 1. The second, these are not, well, there's a second question, but the school gave us some, she has said, but they seem pretty pathetic. They say they are 3 layers, but that's debatable. We have 2-layer cloth masks with inserted filter, and I am waiting for level 3 surgical masks on order. Bottom line, are the 2-layer cloth masks with inserted filter still okay until I can get the others? So wearing masks 2 days in a row, the N95, and cloth masks with filter. There are many questions out there about masks and what is good and what is still good. I know many have a lot of cloth masks sitting in their drawers or elsewhere. So can we start with Emery and move to Matthew, or either one of you? You can tussle for this one.
So I'll answer the question about and Matthew, from there. It's all about the fit when it comes to Omicron. So the concern about cloth masks with that have 3 layers is that the 3 layers may not completely cover your face. So often the 2 layers are bigger and the middle layer is smaller. And surgical masks often gape. So the key to preventing Omicron transmission is to make sure that a mask is very snug, which is why they're recommending N95s, because they're almost like suction cups, and the N95 is a bit better at preventing transmission of the Omicron variant. So I'll let Matt tell you whether it should be N95s. I'm a bit confused about that because not everybody can get an N95 for their kids. If people want a box of small N95s that I accidentally purchased for my office and can't use, I'll post that it's available. What I am telling adults, and you can comment on this, Matthew, too, is if you can't get a KN95 or an N95, but you have surgical masks, put the surgical mask on, but get your 3-layer cloth mask over top, because the cloth mask will make the surgical mask fit snug to the face. And that's just for real situations where people may just not have access to N95s and KN95s for a variety of reasons.
Great idea. That's a great idea, Anne-Marie. I never thought of that. I'm thinking, what am I going to do with all my cloth masks and my surgical masks? So there you go.
Mhm.
Matthew?
I think Anne-Marie has touched on the key points, and I think that, masking has gotten more complicated recently. There's been new advice, new guidance, new messages out there about what masking looks like in the perfect world, what everyone should be doing, what the minimum standard is. And I really do want to try and keep it simple, because it's more important that we do something well than to try and do it perfectly and get lost in doing it perfectly. What we're saying in public health is that it's as important now as it ever has been to make sure that you or your child are wearing the best quality mask you can in terms of fit around your face and in terms of filtration, and also in terms of what you're actually willing to tolerate wearing. In principle, an N95 mask is the best kind of mask, but I don't know that every child is willing to wear that continuously throughout the day. And so we recognize that sometimes you have to compromise a little bit on that to make sure that the child is actually willing to tolerate it, being on their face for hours and hours at a time. And it is really balancing those things and trying within that framework of getting the best possible mask you can that you can actually wear for the day. If you're able to get N95s or K95s and tolerate wearing them for the day, that is your best bet. They fit really well on your face. They have multiple layers. They've got filtration in there. That is your best bet if you can access it and you can tolerate wearing it. But medical masks are still a good thing to wear if you can fit them well. And we know the schools are offering the 3-ply reusable masks, which can be another reasonable option out there. And certainly we're telling everyone to look at what their masks are and to upgrade them where they can. And if your child is currently wearing a 1-layer or a 2-layer mask, please do upgrade to one of those 3-layer masks the schools are offering. It is important to scrutinize what you're currently doing and try and get the best mask that you can. I will say in response to part of the question of, I'm waiting for a better mask to come in, what should I do in the meantime? Our message is still do the best you can with what you have. It is totally appropriate to wear a good cloth mask while you're waiting for those medical masks or N95s to come in. I hear a bit of an echo.
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
You sound good.
I sound good?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I must be the only one hearing my echo.
I hear your echo as well, but it's okay. You're doing okay now.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks. Sorry about that. I was just going to say the bottom line is the best mask you can. If that can be one of these, medical masks or N95s, by all means, go for that. But that's not the only option out there. And the key thing is the best that you can get your hands on that you're willing to wear for the day.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew.
Matthew, the question was also asked about whether or not if you have an N95, do you have to dispose of it at the end of the day and put another one on the next day? That's a tough one because, wow, they're expensive. What is your response to that?
So I think that typically when we talk about N95, we're talking to people who are healthcare workers who are wearing them in hospitals or long-term care homes. They're dealing with sick people, and they're using them as personal protection when they're dealing with someone who could have COVID-19. And in those cases, we say because they could be contaminated with infectious droplets, it is important that you change them out and get new ones on for your next patient encounter. When you're wearing them in the community, at school, at the grocery store, wherever else you are, the main benefit they provide is that they cover your mouth and nose to keep you from spreading droplets of yours out to others. And if everyone else is wearing a mask, they're also doing the same, and we're all keeping our own droplets contained. In that context, it is, reasonable to wear a mask across multiple days, assuming that you're not dealing with someone who's sick, assuming that it's not, gotten rained on and therefore is beginning to crumple and lose its integrity. As long as the mask is in good shape and it's not getting dirty or damaged, you can wear it over multiple days as a member of the community if you're not in a healthcare setting.
Right. That's this was very, very clear, extremely educational. I mean, everything is, but I know the mask questions, there's so many people that are not sure. So thank you both for that. That's wonderful. Now we're in the firing round. We have about 12 minutes. We're going to try to get through 20 questions. So here we go. Can you speak to the connection between COVID infection in kids and diabetes diagnosis? Are you hearing anything like that? Matthew will.
I can speak to that. So I know there was a study that was published in the CDC's journal just this month looking at that. There is some connection they found in that study. I'm looking to see what else studies are able to find so we get a better understanding of it. But there are studies looking at this question right now, and there could be a connection.
Okay. Thank you. Is the Moderna booster 4th dose for immunocompromised full or half dose? Moderna booster 4th dose for immunocompromised.
So I can take that as well. So someone who is more severely immune compromised, if they're getting a booster dose of Moderna, it is a full dose, which is the 100 microgram dosage.
Great. Helen, I can see signs of fracturing in my workplace and in my church regarding vaccine or vaccine hesitant. How can workplaces support everyone and help us all to move on or move past?
So it's super important, whether you're dealing with the workplace or whether you're dealing with the family, to remain connected to people, to keep the bridges intact, even if they're not agreeing to get vaccinated. The last thing we want to do is push people who are struggling to trust science into even a darker place. As much as you can maintain a connection, I know it's really hard. You want to go head to head and try and convince them. A lot of people at this stage of the game, they are entrenched in their decision making. You really have to just step away from the whole science conversations and just focus on your love and care for that person, regardless of the fact that you're not going to agree. And let's be honest, also take safety precautions to keep yourself safe, because you're going to continue to interact with that person. So love and support and no judgment, and really just staying out of the whole scientific argument, because at this point it isn't going to be helpful, sadly.
Thank you, Helen. Is isolating even the right thing to do anymore if it is only 5 days? With research showing that people being infectious up to 10 days, it is such an awkward feeling, especially when exposed in a household and being asymptomatic.
So I answer that. I've actually changed my recommendations in my office just this past week, having had a couple of staff people who were testing positive, mainly because I'm following what the research is showing, that this virus can be infectious up to day 8, 9, and 10. The fewer symptoms you have, the less likely you're still shedding virus closer to the 10-day mark. But I think it's just safe if people can to continue to isolate or quarantine for the full 10 days.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Helen, how can I help my kids to not be afraid at school when there are kids around with poor mask habits, especially nutrition breaks?
So this is where we can talk with our kids about what they can control, right? So they need to monitor their own mask, their own hygiene, their own distancing, which of course will create safety for them. There is a lot of things at the school that is outside of their control. And there are things that they're just going to have to manage, mitigate. And in some ways, it's a risk tolerance, right? All of us in these situations have to be risk tolerant. We have to be able to manage that. And again, work through those feelings, work through those fears, and know that none of us are in situations that are totally risk free. We all have to be in them and trying to manage our way through them. So continue to work with your kids around what they can do, what they can control, keeping themselves safe. If they aren't feeling safe with a child that's not wearing a mask properly, find alternate places to sit, move away from that child, talk to the teacher, ask for those, to be in a different spot. Like, there are some things that you can do to make sure that there's some safeguards in place if there's some consistency around that. But really, again, focusing on your child, doing what they can to focus on their own safety.
Thanks, Helen. Matthew, the university is now mandating no cloth masks and encouraging medical masks, but so far only providing level 2. And this is alleged, I must say. I don't know for certain this person is saying this is happening. How can the U of G community be safe if wearing a cloth mask is discouraged, and thus we will be wearing masks with gaps? Is that something that you might have an answer for, Anne-Marie, either one of you?
Go ahead, Matt. I'm researching something for just a sec.
I was just going to say, Marva, the key message is still wear the best mask you can that fits well and provides the best filtration. Medical masks are a really good option. Anne-Marie shared earlier an option for helping to make that medical mask fit over your face if it's not fitting very well. There are other things out there like tying a loop in the band around your ear so that it fits a little bit more snugly at the side of your face. Medical masks are good masks, and the key thing is just making sure you're wearing it in a way that fits your face well.
Great, thank you. And when will widespread free rapid tests be available? I don't know if that will be the government of Ontario, or can we answer that?
I think we're waiting on more information. We know that there's been a real supply challenge, and the government's been focused on getting them to hospitals and long-term care homes and schools. And as we get more supply, I think it will be easier to find them in the community.
Thank you. I think this question has been answered before, but it's worded a little bit differently. And just let me know if there's anything additional to add. Are those who have been infected with the BA.1 Omicron at risk at being or getting infected again with BA.2? Any word on vaccine effectiveness on this? And I think we responded to that one already at the top. Can we say in a nutshell? Matthew, can you just comment on that in a nutshell?
I think in a nutshell, we need more data, but we expect it to behave very similar between BA.1 and BA.2. If you had infection with Omicron, this month, the odds of you getting another infection with BA.2 next month are very, very, very slim. Reinfections can happen, but usually months and months and months apart.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, this person says, I read that medicines that interact with the new Pfizer pill, and it seems there's a lot of commonly used medicines, either one. This will mean that many people won't be able to be given it. Are there other medicines coming out in the near future? And would you know if they'll be less interactive with other medicines? Matt or Anne-Marie?
Yeah. So yes, the medication that has recently been approved for use in Canada, first of all, will not be widely available, and it will be used for people who are at high risk. So it's really not within people's grasp. And it is two medications in one. They're both what are called protease inhibitors, which traditionally have a lot of interactions with other drugs. There is another one coming out that Merck is researching, but I believe it's a similar type of medication using two protease inhibitors. Other than that, there are monoclonal antibodies, not in oral form. They're given in hospital and again, given to high-risk people who are early on in infection. Did I miss anything, Matt?
I think you've got it, Anne-Marie.
Yeah.
Right. Laura has quite a long thing about her 8-year-old in school, but her question really is, can someone explain why the reporting to parents has stopped as we try to stop the spread of Omicron? That's a tough one.
Well, I can take that one, Marva. So since we entered the Omicron wave that we're in right now, our context has actually been quite different than how it's been in previous waves. We found that with Omicron spreading as rapidly as it was, it meant that our testing system was overwhelmed because there were so many cases, so many tests. Not only were we not able to keep up with all the tests that were being needed, but there was slowdowns in terms of when we could get results for tests happening in long-term care and outbreaks. And there's some real challenges in us being able to manage the demands for tests. So as a consequence, there were some changes to who was eligible for tests the government made in December. And it means that right now, not everyone can get a test. Not everyone who used to be able to go into an AC and get a PCR swab can get it anymore. It is much more restricted in order to help manage the demand. What that means, of course, for schools is that we're not always going to know if someone has COVID-19. They may be able to get a rapid test done, but we're not going to have a way of knowing the results of that. And if that rapid test isn't available, then we might presume they have COVID and just ask them to stay home for five days or so. So we don't really have the ability to identify cases in schools as a health system compared to what we used to have in previous waves. And so as a consequence, there are changes that come into play for how we manage in schools. And one of those changes, unfortunately, is that because we're not going to be knowing about these cases, schools can't be reporting that out to family members and other students. It's just the context is so different because of those testing changes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Helen, one side of the family is completely anti-vax and will dispute with faulty science, but believe it is true. How to deal with this?
Well, I go back to my earlier comments, Marva, this is a really painful situation. And frankly, we see more and more of it as the pandemic goes on, because people get more and more entrenched. And we've seen it, you know, with moving to the third booster and now the fourth booster for folks in long-term care and immunocompromised. So it just, all the fear, the uncertainty breeds those conspiracy theories, and that divides families. And it's incredibly sad and incredibly painful. My comments earlier, how important it is to do your very best to stay out of the scientific discussions at this point, maintain a loving and supportive connection, even if you can only do that virtually or by phone or by text. Do everything you can to hold on to the thread of that relationship. And then hopefully over time, you can rethread and rebuild and reconnect. But right now, given how entrenched and how fear-based that is, we're seeing it with the trucking situation here as well. It just feeds so much hopelessness and fear. So do what you can to hold on to those threads in a loving, supportive, non-judgmental way, telling the person how much you love them, telling them how much you care about them, and staying out of all the science.
That's great. Thank you, Helen. Nancy is a friend of mine, Nancy McDonald. She asked a question. Can you comment on why the Omicron virus is so much more transmissible? Are we missing anything from other possible ways to add to the list of preventative or avoidance measures without going too fearful? Matthew or Anne-Marie?
I don't mind taking a stab at that, Anne-Marie. So in terms of why Omicron transmits much more easily and spreads faster than Delta did or previous variants, it's not an answer we have completely. We know that Omicron has a lot of structural differences because of the mutations it has. That means it could enter the body more easily, or could be better able to evade the protections that we normally have against the previous variants. We're still understanding as a science community exactly what makes it so different and why it spreads so easily. When it comes to other modes of transmission, other ways it spreads, I know that there are scientists looking at that question right now to see, are there any stones that have been left unturned to help us answer this question? You know, we've learned a lot about COVID over the past couple of years. We are still learning. We've learned, for example, over the past couple of years that transmission through aerosols actually plays a bigger role than we thought it did at the beginning of the pandemic. We may yet learn more about Omicron. I know scientists are looking at it, and if there are things we can do that we're not currently doing that make a difference, we'll be recommending them as the evidence arrives.
Marva.
Thank you. When will ages 12 to 17 get their booster shots? I was saying last three questions. I heard from a pharmacist that it hasn't been approved. I'm going to ask Matthew to hold on to that question. I'm going to give the second question to Anne-Marie so we can go through this quickly. How to manage risk in multi-generational family situations. Older couple in their 60s, younger people in their 20s, going out more. All in the family have been vaccinated and boosted. And then final question to Matthew. Will teachers soon be added to the list of people who can access PCR? I've heard some health units are allowing, to get tested. So start with you, Matthew, you have two.
Thanks. I'll start with the question about 12 to 17 and booster shots. So no eligibility quite yet. I've heard that NACI is looking at this question. They're going to give their expert advice, hopefully very soon. And if they recommend these booster shots for this age group, then we'll be offering them as a public health unit and as a province. So hopefully have an answer for that pretty soon, but right now the answer is no. On the question of PCR eligibility, we don't have an answer for that quite yet either. We are getting information and updates from the province as they have updates for us. But I know we're all wondering about, as we get past this Omicron wave, what will testing look like? What will isolation look like? What will all of these things look like as we exit the current context? We don't have an answer yet, but we are looking for some updates on that pretty soon.
Anne-Marie?
I'll just make a quick comment because you were talking about PCR testing. They're not widely available and restricted to a small group of people, but rapid antigen tests, I'll just say the pharmacies now have rats. So many pharmacies have ordered rapid antigen tests and they're starting to trickle into pharmacies. they cost a lot, and I'm not happy about the fact that they are prohibitive to some individuals or many individuals who may not be able to afford them. But just so people know, pharmacies are starting to get the rapid antigen tests. And on that same note, the multi-generational families, what I would do is put as many extra layers between the young people who are going out and about. So if the young people have 3 doses, they're very protected. Still get Omicron, they will likely get a runny nose if they get Omicron. But if they bring the virus home and expose more frail or elderly people to that virus, even if those older folks have 3 doses, they are still at greater risk of developing serious illness, especially if they have other illnesses or comorbidities. So if that's the situation in a multi-generational home, I would try to put more layers or distance between the young folks and the older folks. And maybe you can use rapid antigen tests to test the younger people, have the older folks separated from the younger folks at mealtime, try to keep your distance, even wear masks. Very, very difficult to do because in multi-generational homes with a lot of people in them, there may not be the space for distancing and keeping separate. So I think that is an issue that families need to take a look at.
Great, thank you. I think we're at closing. Thank you so much for that answer, Emery. And Matthew, in the last, the question that was about Omicron and transmission, Nancy said, good answer. Thank you, Matthew. So just want to pass that along to you. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm thinking what we could do is just start with brief closing remarks. And I know, Helen, this week with Bell, Let's Talk, some strategies for folks right now with mental health way up there. It'd be great to hear from you, and going forward, Matthew and Emery on the physical side. There is one question in here, and it is the last question, and so this person wrote this in, so I'll just ask it. Is everybody okay with that? We ran over just a tiny bit. She says there are different instructions with the rapid tests. Do we have to tickle the kids' brains still? Can we just do the bottom part of the nostril like they do for the PCRs now? And so this is a question that had not been asked before, so I figured that we should just include that.
I'll throw my hat in the ring. You don't have to tickle the brains, but it can be just in the front of the nose, but it does need to sting a little bit. So if you're just kind of softly brushing the inside of the nose, you may not be getting enough cellular material for the test to be accurate. So you want to follow the instructions very closely. You want to make sure that it stings just a bit, but not way back in the nasal pharynx. And you need to hold the swab, pinch it as it's being removed. Again, that's just to allow the swab to get more cellular material than it would otherwise.
That's great, because so many parents are doing that now where they didn't have to do it before. So that's why this question was a great question. Matthew, do you have anything to add?
Not much to add except to say that there's a whole bunch of different kinds of rapid test kits out there. And the key thing I'll add is just look at the instructions that come with it, because they come not just with a kit, but with a swab. And some swabs are meant for going deeper or shallower. So look to the instructions and try to follow them as best you can.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And sometimes there are videos as well. I used a video. Thank you. Thank you all so very much. This was really awesome. And thank you everybody for being on. I'm not closing yet because we want to hear from Helen, from Matthew, and from Emery. Maybe we'll leave Helen for last, especially as we go out this week. So I'll start with Emery and then move to Matthew, and maybe we could just go off camera while Emery speaks, just to help with that.
Yeah, sorry about that tonight. I'm out in the country and it's probably not great out here tonight. I'm not going to give you any specific closing remarks, but more information, because there was one question that wasn't answered, and I think we need as much information as we can to feel comfortable with, if we can, with what's happening right now. Someone talked about just get it over with and maybe have a COVID party where you get together with other people who are positive. Please don't do that. Please do not do that. You should not put yourself at risk intentionally. Right now, there are more than 4,000 people in hospital in the province with COVID-19. There are 356 on a ventilator. And this illness is deadly. We saw more deaths today than we've seen in a year. And you just don't want to put yourself intentionally at risk and therefore possibly risk your life.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Anne-Marie. We'll move to Matthew.
I think for my parting remark, I'll just really say thank you. And thank you specifically for being engaged and staying engaged. I know I've been seeing a lot on social media and online, people saying, you know, I'm done with COVID. I'm done dealing with COVID. I'm disengaging from that conversation. Unfortunately, even though it's been a very difficult 2 years and we may feel like we're done with COVID, COVID isn't done with us. And so we need to keep combating it by doing the things we know work and by staying engaged, by asking questions, getting good information, thinking about how we can protect ourselves and those around us and our community. And really, if we can all stay engaged and stay interested and curious and ask our questions, then that's what's going to get us through this. That's what I think is going to help us get from where we are right now to a better spring. We just need to do that for a little bit longer. And if you can stay engaged, please do. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew. And before Helen provides her remarks, let me just read a couple of things in the chat. I think we've answered everything, which is great. We got through everything tonight. Thank you all so much. Kevin says, thanks for easing my mind. Sarah said, thank you so much to all of you. This has really, really helped and made at least me feel so much better. Susan says, thank you. You're doing something for people that is not happening in other parts of Canada. And Susan, another Susan says, thank you for great information. Tracy said, gratitude to all of you. Lydia says, thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, with so many different opinions out there, this panel always helps me stay grounded. God bless you all, rest well. Allison, thank you. You are all amazing. Ken, thanks so much. And it continues. Thank you all for your valuable information. So Matthew, with all of those thanks, I'm sure that you'll come back again.
Yes.
So, right? This is strategy, reading all the thank yous to you.
Yeah, you haven't gotten rid of me yet, Marva.
Okay, that's awesome. And now to Helen.
Thanks, Marva. So with Bell Let's Talk today, it really is an invitation to challenge ourselves to try something different, to boost our coping. It's that new pair of shoes that I was talking about earlier. So join a webinar like this, register for a virtual program like Bounce Back, connect with a therapist, call your doctor, call a friend to check in on them. There are so many things that you can do to really support yourselves and to also connect with people that you're worried about. Whatever works for you, do more of that today and as part of your regular routine. What we really don't want you to do is to sit with those dark feelings, because silence feeds that hopelessness. Stay connected, stay grounded, because that's what feeds the hope. So when in doubt, call us at Here 24/7. We can help you unpack your feelings, boost your coping, and get you connected. So use your informal support system and trust your formal system. We are really all here for each other. This is the best way for us to get through this challenging chapter of our lives together.
Thank you, Helen. That's great advice. And in closing, thanks again to every single person, Megan behind the scenes, certainly Anne-Marie, Helen, and Matthew for your wise counsel with great empathy, great knowledge, great understanding. I think it's not just what you say, but it's how you say it and how you connect with people, and really relatable in all of how you share the information. We just want to remind you that we're accepting donations to both Bracelet of Hope and Hope House. If folks want to go to our website, the links to these charities are on the Zoom and on our Facebook pages, the CMHA's Facebook page and Facebook page for Bracelet of Hope, and certainly for Hope House. And I want to leave you with a wee bit of a quote. And before I give you the quote, I'm going to shamelessly promote the Arts Everywhere Festival. When I talk about big hugs, this is one of my big giant hug right now. On Friday and Saturday, the conversations are going to be all about how we work together in community to help each other. And Friday and Saturday, there are free programs, and you can go to Arts Everywhere, just Google artseverywhere.ca, and I'll send that information to Helen and Megan's team as well. Bell Hooks died a few weeks ago, and she's a phenomenal woman, 40 books. And as we move into Black History Month, starting next week, I thought I would read this to you. It's funny, Bell Let's Talk and Bell Hooks, there's a link there. To build community requires vigilant awareness of the work that we must continually do. To build community requires vigilant awareness of the work that we must continually do. And certainly going through COVID-19, all of us are in this together. And this is the work that we continue to do on your behalf, and we continue to do with you. So thank you once again. I look forward to next February. When we started this, we thought we would be done already. And we're not, we're still on it. Please go to, remember, the Here 24/7 line, your public health, to get really great information. Just keep looking for information in places that are based scientifically, also quite professional and very reputable to help you. Thank you all so much. Last thank you from Linda for the webinar, very helpful, with a big heart. Sending you hugs and a big heart, everyone. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Marva.
Thanks, Marva.
Mhm.
Welcome. Thank